We are officially entering week 7 for My Hero Ultra Rumble, and with this week, we have a whole slew of buffs and nerfs for characters that we need to talk about that are going to change up the tier list a little bit. Not quite as much as you would think it's going to change up the tier list, but it will change it up a little bit. Now, unfortunately, in this maintenance, they didn't actually say anything about bug fixes or do any bug fixes that I know of really, besides adding anti-cheat to PC. So we'll have to wait and see for news on that. I'm sorry guys, I don't have more news on it, but as soon as we know more, I will let you guys know, of course, with the video. So getting right into this week's tier list though, we are going to start by adjusting where Sue is. Sue has been at the top of S tier for about 2 weeks now. She has been insanely good and insanely hard to hit with insane damage, right? I asked people on YouTube, do you think Sue's nerfs take her out of the current meta in My Hero Ultra Rumble? 23% of people said yes, she is no longer meta. Whereas 77% of people said no, Sue is still in the meta. And I gotta agree with those people. Sue is definitely still S tier, definitely still meta. And unfortunately, I don't think the nerfs that were done to her really changed anything, because fundamentally it's just her kit and her character. Like, it's what I've been saying all along. It's hard to nerf a character like this when you're nerfing things like hitboxes and stuff like that, is essentially what you would have to do for Sue, or change her kit completely so that she does not move around so fast and isn't so hard to hit, right? So if you don't know what the nerfs were for Sue, the biggest one that I want to point out, this says beta skill ammo count decreased. It actually means alpha skill. Her alpha skill ammo count was decreased from 3 charges at levels 1, 2, and 3 to 2 charges. That was the biggest change for Sue overall. There were some damage changes and reload time changes, but those weren't that big of a deal. And these reload time changes were for the alpha skill as well, and these were just to make it so, because now she only has 2 charges on levels 1, 2, and 3, that she has a little bit shorter cooldown. But it's not even that much shorter of a cooldown. It's 0.25 of a second. So overall, it was a nerf for Sue, right? And so because of that, she's a little bit easier to track down earlier in the game and kill. But if that Sue gets her alpha skill to level 4, it's the same Sue you've been playing against the whole time, right? So the only thing I can really say that this nerf has done has made her easier to kill at the start of the game, and you gotta think a little bit more as a Sue player at the start of the game before just mindlessly engaging on people and thinking that you can run away. Okay, so for that reason, I'm gonna move Sue actually down just one measly little spot, because I think now, in terms of movement, because Bakugo always is able to use his full movement from the start of battle, whereas Sue has to get to level 4 on her alpha skill now to have her full range of movement that she originally had. I think Bakugo has moved up a little bit in terms of just use of, like, ease of use, kit, and mobility. So I think Bakugo is at the top. Now, even though I am moving Bakugo up to the top of S tier, we have to, keep in consideration that Bakugo also got a nerf. His attack special reload time, or his ability to fly, was increased from 10 seconds to 12 seconds. But that's just a 2-second delay on how much he can fly around, and he has 2 bursts of flying per use, right? So overall, that doesn't really affect Bakugo, and I feel like that change is so minute that it doesn't really change anything in the game at all. So we're gonna put Bakugo at the top. Todoroki is gonna stay where he's at, and Deku also got a nerf for whatever reason. I don't feel like this was necessary at all, but let me know down in the comments what you guys think. So for Deku's Gamma skill, it was nerfed across the board from levels 1 to 10, where now the cooldown time is longer for each of those times. But once again, I just have to say, I don't feel like this nerf does a whole lot in terms of impacting Deku's maneuverability, which is the big reason they nerfed this, right? They nerfed Deku's Gamma skill because it's his Black Whip that lets him move up and down buildings, side to side, get away. But I don't feel like it was necessary, because it's still not as good as Bakugo's movement, and it's one of his core kit abilities, whereas Bakugo's is a special ability. And I don't know too many people who complained that Deku's movement was too crazy and too insane. Like, I know people complained about Sue, I know people complained about Bakugo, but like, who complained about Deku? Who was it? Was it you? Because I don't know. Like, people don't complain about Todoroki either, because Todoroki only has horizontal movement. He doesn't even have vertical movement. So I think Todoroki right now, just because of cooldowns on his movement is above Deku, and that's why Deku is at the bottom of S tier. And yeah, other than that, S tier hasn't changed at all. The same characters in S tier, we just switched Froppy and Bakugo around. So not many changes there. Moving on to the next character on my list, I want to talk about Aizawa. Okay, so he only got his Gamma skill buffed, which is not even what anybody remotely wanted, because we have problems with how buggy his alpha is and how buggy his beta is. Okay, so if you don't already know, Aizawa's alpha will sometimes just hit enemies without doing damage, mind you, and not bind them, but make them invulnerable and knock them down for no reason. It doesn't make sense. And then his beta skill will sometimes miss its tracking and clip through opponents, or only hit like 2 charges of the kick on somebody before making them invulnerable. And then of course he has his special action, which feels like you're staring at somebody for 5 seconds and it's still not taking effect. Okay, there's just a lot of problems with Aizawa and how buggy he is. And with the address of this buff that they've given us on his Gamma skill, like they're like, we heard people were complaining that Aizawa doesn't have enough damage, so we gave him more damage on his Gamma skill. Well, yes, he doesn't have enough damage, but that wasn't the real problem. The real problem is he was just buggy as hell. Okay, and that's what they needed to fix, and exactly what they did not fix. So for that reason, I am literally going to leave Aizawa here at the bottom of C tier, and that is because 3 of his 4 abilities are bugged. Okay, his special action, his alpha, and his beta, all bugged, all don't work correctly. They didn't address them, and they just buffed his Gamma and said, here you go, guys. Okay, so we're leaving him there. Now, I will say, if all that stuff gets fixed, works correctly, feels good to play, he's an easy A tier character with a high skill ceiling. Okay, that's just not where he's at right now, and I would love for him to be there. Honestly, he's a lot of fun to play when he works correctly. He's probably one of my favorite characters to play because he does feel like he has that skill ceiling, but unfortunately, he's just bugged, and it is the way it is. All right, so now going back up to A tier, let's address A tier. I just had to get that off my chest. All right, so All Might is at the top of A tier. Ida stays there. Like, a lot of these characters are going to relatively stay where they're at because they haven't changed anything about these characters. They haven't buffed or nerfed these characters, and a lot of these characters are up here due to movement, due to damage, due to range, and things like that. So when you think about these characters in terms of those things, like how much damage they can do, how much movement they have, and how much range they have with their attacks, right? A lot of these characters, you would understand why they're up here towards the top. As we get towards the bottom of A tier though, like past Toga, when you look at Kirishima, Kaminari, Shigaraki, and Yaoyorozu specifically, who also got nerfs for whatever reason, these 4 characters in particular lack some of the movement that these other characters lack. Yes, even Cementos, I'm saying, has better movement. Like, he has insane vertical movement compared to some of these characters, right? And Cementos is insanely good. But Kirishima has some of the best damage in the game, so that's why he's still up here in A tier. Like, he could literally be an S tier character if he just had a little more movement. But even then, I don't know how you would give him more movement. I think his kit's solid. I think he could be an S tier character in the right hands of the right player. But for the average player, just based on his kit, I would say he's an A tier character, right? Kaminari, I kind of feel the same way about. He doesn't do quite as much like single target damage as Kirishima does. These characters both have AoEs, but Kaminari's AoE is a little bit bigger and has a little bit more range. But once again, he just doesn't quite have the amount of damage that Kirishima does, which is why Kaminari is below Kirishima. They both have about the same amount of movement overall, though, when it comes to their movement abilities. Shigaraki I have below them, which I know might upset a lot of people, especially because there's a lot of Shigaraki mains who are like, this guy is the best guy in damage. He does true damage past the GP bar or past the guard point bar. He endgame can clap a whole team on his own, which is entirely true, depending on the zone and where it pulls. Out in the open, Shigaraki struggles to reach targets that are far away. So if you have a Bakugo or a Su or a Todoroki or a Deku, they're all just going to snipe or play around with Shigaraki and avoid his damage, which is all on the ground. He needs ground line of sight to hit people, which is one of his biggest weaknesses. Early game, you drop in a Shigaraki in Typhoon Zone. You have a Bakugo on top of the building. You just have to look up at him. You can't damage him, okay? But if you can get into those close encounter fights, much like Kirishima, much like Kaminari, I feel like Shigaraki is definitely probably the best character in the game. He can take a whole health bar and guard points and all and just melt it. Like it's nothing. Like it's butter. It's insanely, insanely good. He's so good, okay? But now, let's talk about Yaoyorozu, because Yaoyorozu's nerfs were so, in my opinion, maybe on console it's worse, okay? I can see it on console being worse, but in my opinion, so unnecessary. Like, I did not actually expect them to nerf Yaoyorozu. So, her beta skill reload times were increased across the board from level 1 to level 10. And this was not a small increase, okay? This is actually a pretty big one. On level 1, from 12 seconds to 15 seconds. That is a 3-second increase. That means that is 3 seconds longer that you cannot use her beta skill. At level 10, it's from 8 seconds to 11 seconds. So same thing, a 3-second increase all the way up at that level. That is insane to me that they have increased the reload time on Yaoyorozu by that much. Like, that limits her mobility. That was her mobility. That was her mobility. And they took it away. They just took it away. She is invulnerable when she does it, right? Which is a big plus. But I feel like that nerf, like, she's still really good. She's still really good. And it pains me to do this because we just moved her up. But we got to move her down to B tier. We have to. And then if I'm moving Yaoyorozu down to B tier and we compare her to Mount Lady, who has more movement than Yaoyorozu more frequently, can do massive AoE damage at the end of the game, right? I feel like Mount Lady has to trade Yaoyorozu spots. I just feel like that's how it is. Like, Mount Lady is a giant walking billboard now if you have a good Aizawa, and she can't do anything in her giant form, but a good Mount Lady will just transform back, you know, and she won't stay giant. And so, I don't know, I feel like Mount Lady has taken Yaoyorozu's spot because of that nerf. That nerf really hurt Yaoyorozu mains, and it was so uncalled for and so unnecessary. Like, that's just absolutely crazy to me that they nerfed Yaoyorozu for what seems like no reason at all, okay? Moving on in B tier, we have Dabi. A lot of people have petitioned and said in the comments, we want Dabi to be higher. We want him to be S tier, A tier, and then I've had a few comments also saying Dabi should be lower in C tier. And I don't think I've ever seen any comments where people can agree and just say, yeah, he should be B tier, which, you know, I'm kind of meeting you in the middle here. But let me talk about Dabi, because this character I feel like is pretty controversial to people. So Dabi is limited in movement. His alpha skill is insanely good because it has been sped up in the very first patch they did with nerfing and buffing characters, right? So his alpha is really good. His Ring of Fire is good for blocking projectiles and reviving teammates. He can set himself ablaze when somebody goes to finish him, giving him a little bit more time, or your teammates a little bit more time to get there. But what does Dabi lack? Dabi lacks damage after he has ran out of his alpha skills, because then you are relying on your beta and gamma skill, which are traps and a Ring of Fire, to potentially do damage. Most people are not going to walk into the traps, typically, and most people are not just going to stand in your Ring of Fire, typically, okay? And so that really limits Dabi. And then on top of that, let's say you're out of alphas, and people are smart enough to not just walk into your beta and your gamma, he has no mobility, and people will chase you down. And it makes it difficult as a Dabi player to survive, especially in early game. By late game, if you have leveled up his abilities, he is insanely good and can be a really good carry, and mobility doesn't matter as much in late game. Okay, but because of the fact that Dabi kind of gets clapped early to mid game, I have to keep him in B tier. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. If things end up changing, or maybe they give him like an extra use of his beta or gamma or something like that in the future, I could definitely see him moving up. Okay, but for right now, I feel like it is fair to keep Dabi in B tier. As far as Ibura goes, Ibura has even less movement than Dabi. She is team oriented with her cage. She can capture and ignore the GP bar like Shigaraki, but she does have to have the time to be able to hold the enemy in her vines. If the enemy teammates help their teammate like they're supposed to, then you're just not able to fully utilize Ibra. And because she is such a team player, that is why she is down here in B tier. Uraraka, she is the one character I am going to move. Okay, I've just had a love-hate relationship with the character. Don't get me wrong, guys. I actually genuinely enjoy playing Uraraka. She's one of my top favorite characters to like play in My Hero Ultra Rumble. And she's really, really good when her alpha works correctly, but it just feels so bad when her alpha does not work correctly. But for the sake of this tier list, I'm going to just pretend in my mind that the alpha works right, okay? So assuming the alpha works right every game that we play with her, which never happens, okay? But assuming the alpha was working right, where would I place Uraraka? That's what we're going to do now. So I would probably put Uraraka above All Might, honestly. I gotta put him, yep. I would put Uraraka above All Might. I put her at the top of A tier, maybe even an argument for S, okay? Her spin to win is insanely good. Her anti-gravity on herself that lets her get across the map is as bad as Sue. Like, tracking down an Uraraka who is good is as bad as chasing down a Sue. She has a little bit bigger hitbox, but she is insanely good. And if you have a good Uraraka, she will stand up at height and then use her ability to drop the rocks on you from above without you ever even knowing where she did it from, okay? Originally, at the start of the game, I kind of placed Uraraka lower because of the glitches on her alpha, as well as her kit feeling clunky. Now, getting more into the game, I feel like her kit is fine. My biggest problem with her is her alpha, right? As soon as they fix that, she is fully deserving of where I'm putting her right now, but I'm putting her here just with the idea in mind that everything works correctly, okay? And now you might argue, well, you did it for Uraraka, why don't you do that for Aizawa? Because Aizawa just has way too many things going on. Uraraka has one problem, Aizawa has three, which is why I brought him up earlier in the video, right? Okay, and last but not least, we have Kendo. Kendo is another team player that is similar to Ibra, okay? She lacks movement, but she actually has pretty good damage. She doesn't do true damage like Ibra does, so she's not quite as good as Ibra in that respect, but she actually has better ability to defend her teammates with her shield. She can also pick up teammates and use that, use her big hand to engage or disengage from a fight, or at least help her teammates disengage from a fight. Her herself has a little bit harder time disengaging because she has no movement, right? But I feel like if I have Ibra up here, who is fairly similar to Kendo, I'm gonna finally do this after all this time. Kendo is now in B tier, okay? There you go, guys. For everyone that has said Kendo doesn't belong to be in C tier, she is in B tier. Aizawa is the only one in C tier because of how buggy he is, and I feel like that's fair, and I feel pretty confident about this tier list this time around, but I'm sure the comments will prove me wrong. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And if you guys enjoyed the video, please go down there, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and thank you guys so much for watching. Peace.
Maybach music. Can anybody out there